Welcome to the lands of science fiction stories. I wish you a pleasant listening experience. The classroom hummed with a low murmur of alien voices, a blend of languages and species from across the galaxy. Students of all shapes and sizes filled the large circular hall. At the center stood Cade Riker, a human instructor from Earth, clutching a sidearm that, to his audience, looked more like a weapon fit for a starship's turret. Silence swept across the room as Cade laid the pistol on the table in front of him, its cold, metallic sheen catching the ambient light. To the Xyloxians, tall and thin with translucent skin, it seemed impossibly heavy. To the Varkos, quadrupedal and reptilian, the weapon looked absurd in scale for a mere human. Hawk, a lizard-like student from the planet Zaire, raised his scaled brow, his voice a guttural croak. "That is standard issue? For a soldier?" Cade smiled, the warmth of his expression belying the cool detachment in his eyes. "Not just for soldiers. Any citizen of Earth can own one." The room shifted, alien students exchanging glances, their faces reflecting a mix of confusion and unease. Gintar, a towering insectoid with 6 eyes and twitching antennae, clicked his mandibles nervously. "On your world, everyone carries something like this?" Cade's smile widened. "In certain areas, yes. It's useful for protection." A thick tension settled over the room as the students processed the revelation. They had been studying Earth for weeks, learning about its unforgiving environment and dangerous fauna. But hearing that its inhabitants casually wielded such powerful tools of death unnerved them. A smaller student, TK, a blue-skinned humanoid from the distant world of Arios, whispered, "Why do you need so many weapons? Surely your world isn't that dangerous." Cade's face darkened, his voice dropping in pitch. "Earth has never been kind to its inhabitants, but it's not the wildlife that drives us to arm ourselves, it's our history. For centuries we were at war, sometimes with each other, sometimes with forces far greater than us." The aliens shifted uncomfortably in their seats. War wasn't a foreign concept, but it was one they had long ago left behind in favor of diplomacy and advanced technology. Violence was seen as primitive, unnecessary. "Centuries of war?" Gintar's voice was a barely audible rasp. Cade nodded. "Some lasted even longer. It pushed us to innovate, to create weapons that would guarantee survival. At first it was just about not being wiped out. Then we became experts at it." With a click of a button, Cade summoned a holographic display of a colossal human warship bristling with cannons, torpedoes, and railguns. The ship's sheer scale dwarfed anything the students had ever seen. One of the smaller students, a frail creature named Zek, asked, voice trembling, "Is that what you use in wars?" Cade leaned back, arms crossed over his chest. "This is one of our smaller ships." The room fell into stunned silence as the students gazed at the holographic behemoth. "Smaller?" TK's voice barely rose above a whisper. The human nodded. "Our largest vessels? You never want to see one of those." The weight of the words hung in the air as the alien students exchanged uneasy looks. For most of them, their species had long since abandoned the notion of war as a necessity. They relied on diplomacy, on technology that diffused conflict. Yet here was this human, calmly explaining how his species had turned warfare into a craft, a way of life. Harak, the Zairian student, was the first to break the silence, his voice a cautious hiss. "Is this why you call Earth a death world? Because you have so many weapons?" Cade smiled again, but it was cold, almost predatory. "That's part of it. But Earth was a death world long before we started making weapons. We just learned how to survive it, and now we're ready for anything the galaxy throws at us." The projection of the warship flickered before disappearing. Cade picked up the sidearm from the table, holding it loosely in his hand. "Never forget," he said, his voice low and steady. "We didn't choose to become warriors. The universe made us this way." The students exited the lecture hall in a state of stunned silence, the humans' words still ringing in their ears. Hawk walked with his fellow students, their usual lively conversations muted. The reality of what they had learned weighed heavily on them all. Gintar, with his 6 eyes flicking nervously around, finally broke the silence. "Do you think it's true? All that talk about endless war? Hawk flexed his claws, his scales rippling. It's hard not to believe him after what he showed us. That warship, it's too large to be a bluff. TK, trailing behind them, muttered under his breath. But what kind of species lives like that? Always ready for a fight? As they entered the combat simulation room, a sprawling chamber filled with holographic projectors and training droids, a familiar sight greeted them, a human soldier, fully armored, waiting at the far end of the room. The visor of his helmet reflected the students' nervous faces, his posture relaxed, yet alert. This wasn't just a lecture anymore. The instructor from earlier stood beside the soldier, his face unreadable. Today's lesson continues. Now, you'll see how humans fight. Without warning, the soldier raised his arm, activating the combat droids lined up against the walls. The room filled with the hum of energy weapons charging, and before the students could react, the soldier sprang into action. He moved with terrifying efficiency, drawing his sidearm and firing rapid, precise shots at the droids. Each bolt of energy was aimed with lethal accuracy, dismantling the training units in seconds. The alien students could only watch, wide-eyed, as the human tore through the droids as if they were nothing. Hawk's throat tightened as he whispered to Gintar, "Is this what they really fight like?" Gintar didn't answer. None of them could. The human moved like a force of nature, unstoppable, unflinching. The hum of energy weapons dissipated, leaving behind a silence that felt almost oppressive. The last of the combat droids lay scattered across the simulation room, their parts still sparking from the precision of the human soldier's shots. The students stood frozen, their minds racing to comprehend what they had just witnessed. The human soldier stood calmly, his visor still reflecting the shocked faces of the students. He hadn't broken a sweat, hadn't faltered once. The efficiency with which he had dismantled the droids was almost unsettling. The instructor clapped his hands, breaking the silence. That was just the beginning. In real combat, things get much worse. Hawk, his scales now prickling with unease, couldn't stop staring at the human soldier. This was practice? Not even close to real combat? The soldier turned his head slightly as if finally acknowledging the question. "Combat is chaos," he said, his voice metallic through the helmet speaker. "This was controlled. In the field, you don't get control, you get survival." Without another word, the human soldier approached a panel on the far side of the room. The students, still recovering from what they had just seen, watched with mounting dread as he tapped a series of commands into the console. A low rumble vibrated through the floor as new, far more sophisticated droids emerged from hidden compartments in the walls. These weren't the simple training units they had seen earlier. These were combat droids, heavily armed, equipped with energy shields, and designed for real military engagements. Hawk's heart raced as he exchanged a glance with Gintar. "Why are they bringing out real combat droids for a simulation?" Before Gintar could respond, the human instructor answered, his voice cold. "You wanted to understand human tactics. Now you'll see how we fight when the odds aren't in our favor." The alien students shifted nervously. The droids towered over them, their weapons glowing ominously. Unlike before, these droids weren't stationary. They were moving, strategizing. The simulation had escalated to something far more dangerous. The soldier readied a compact rifle that had been strapped to his back. Without hesitation, he took a low stance, his body poised for action. "Let's begin!" The room exploded into chaos. The droids advanced in perfect formation, their energy shields flaring as they moved. Plasma bolts and laser fire shot across the room, their intensity rattling the students who scrambled for cover. Hawk ducked behind a metal pillar, his heart pounding in his chest. He had seen combat before, but this was different. The human soldier moved like a blur, dodging between cover points with an agility that seemed impossible for someone wearing such heavy armor. Every shot he fired was precise, calculated. He didn't waste a single movement, didn't pause to think. It was as if the battle had already played out in his mind and now he was merely executing a plan. The combat droids retaliated with ruthless efficiency, their plasma cannons unleashing waves of destructive energy. The room was filled with the sound of explosions and the sharp crackle of energy shields being tested to their limits. But the soldier was relentless. He moved faster than the droids could adapt, exploiting every weakness in their formation, every gap in their shields. Hawk's throat was dry as he whispered to TK, who was crouched nearby. "He's not even breaking a sweat." TK's wide eyes never left the battle. "How can anyone fight like that?" As the students huddled behind cover, too terrified to move, the soldier continued his assault. The droids, for all their advanced programming and tactical algorithms, were no match for the humans' unpredictable movements. He didn't just outgun them, he outthought them. One by one, the droids fell, their shields shattering under the relentless fire of the human's rifle. The last droid staggered, its servos whining as it attempted to retreat, but the soldier didn't let up. With a final, deafening blast, the droid crumpled to the ground, smoke rising from its mangled form. The simulation ended abruptly, the lights in the room flickering as the system powered down. The human soldier lowered his rifle and turned to face the students. His visor still concealed his face, but they didn't need to see his expression to know the truth. "We fight to win," the soldier said, his voice cold, emotionless. "No matter the cost." The students filed out of the simulation room in a daze, their thoughts spiraling as they tried to process what they had just witnessed. The hallway outside seemed quieter than usual, the hum of distant machinery muted beneath the weight of what they had learned. Hawk walked alongside Gintar and TK, but none of them spoke. The silence stretched on, filled only by the echo of their footsteps on the metal floor. Gintar, his antennae twitching nervously, was the first to break the silence. "I don't understand how a species can live like that." Hawk's claws clicked against the floor as he shook his head. "I thought they were exaggerating. The stories about Earth being a death world. I thought it was just myth." TK, still pale from the intensity of the simulation, muttered, "If that's how they fight in a controlled environment, what do they do in real wars?" Hawk didn't have an answer. The thought gnawed at him. Humans were clearly more than just survivors. They were something else entirely. Something dangerous. The simulation hadn't just been a demonstration of human combat prowess. It had been a glimpse into their mindset. Humans didn't just prepare for war. They thrived in it. Every action, every movement was designed to outlast, to outfight, to survive. As they turned a corner, Hawk saw the instructor standing at the far end of the hall, speaking quietly with the human soldier. The soldier's helmet was off now, revealing a face that was surprisingly unremarkable. Young, calm, focused. He looked like any other soldier, yet Hawk knew now that behind those calm eyes lay something far more dangerous. Gintar stopped, glancing at Hawk. "What chance do we have against them, if they ever turn their attention to the rest of the galaxy?" Hawk's gaze remained fixed on the soldier. "I don't think we do. Not if they fight like that." The instructor turned to them, his eyes cold and calculating. "Today's lesson wasn't just about tactics. It was about mindset. Humans don't fight because they want to. They fight because they have to, and that's what makes them so dangerous." The words lingered in the air as the students shuffled away, the reality of what they had learned sinking in deeper with every step. Humans weren't just another species in the galaxy. They were a force, one that would be impossible to stop if provoked. Hawk's mind raced as he tried to piece it all together. Earth wasn't just a death world. It was a crucible, one that had forged humans into something the galaxy had never seen before. And if they ever decided to unleash that potential, the universe would never be the same again. The weight of the lesson hung heavily in the air long after the students had left the simulation room. Hawk, Gintar, and TK walked in silence through the Academy's sprawling corridors, each lost in their own thoughts. The encounter with the human soldier had left them shaken in a way they couldn't fully articulate. It wasn't just the raw power of the human's combat prowess, nor the terrifying efficiency with which he had dismantled the droids. It was the unsettling realization that humans were different, far different from any species they had encountered before. Hawk's mind raced with questions. Could the galaxy truly withstand a species that lived and breathed combat, that viewed every moment as preparation for the next battle? His people, the Zarians, prided themselves on their strength and resilience, but they had evolved with peace in mind. Diplomacy had long taken precedence over violence, but humans, they seemed to thrive in conflict. As they reached the exit to the academy, Hawk's scales rippled with unease. He glanced at TK, who still hadn't spoken since the simulation had ended. "What are you thinking?" Hawk asked, his voice low. TK, his blue skin pale and his usual energetic demeanor dimmed, hesitated before answering. "I'm thinking we've been wrong about them, about humans. We thought their world was dangerous, but it's not the planet that makes them terrifying. It's them." Gintar, who had been silently observing, finally spoke. His 6 eyes flickered with apprehension. "I always thought humans were just another species, one that got lucky and figured out space travel. But now I wonder if they're the ones who'll shape the future of this galaxy, whether we like it or not." The trio stood at the edge of the Academy's courtyard, staring out into the expanse of the stars. Each of them knew, deep down, that the galaxy had shifted. The more they learned about humans, the clearer it became that they were unlike any other race. And if what the instructor had said was true, that humans fought not because they wanted to, but because they had to, then the future was uncertain. Very uncertain. Weeks passed after the simulation, but the lesson never truly left Hawk's mind. The academy continued with its normal routine, but the alien students found themselves subtly changing in response to what they had learned. Conversations about human combat tactics filled the halls, speculation ran wild, and even the most advanced species present couldn't help but view humans with a mix of awe and trepidation. One afternoon, as Hawk sat in the Academy's archives, poring over historical records, he came across an entry titled, "The Wars of Earth." Asterisk. His claw hovered over the entry, unsure if he wanted to delve further into the terrifying legacy of human warfare. But curiosity won out. The data unfolded before him, recounting millennia of human conflict. Civil wars, global wars, wars in space, battles against insurmountable odds, all meticulously documented. And through every war, one thing was clear. Humans didn't just survive, they adapted, they evolved. Every new enemy only made them stronger, their strategies more ruthless, their technology more devastating. Hawk's chest tightened as he realized the full scope of what he was reading. Humans weren't just survivors, they were conquerors in the making. Every species they had encountered, every threat they had faced had been overcome. And now, with their advanced weapons and lethal tactics, they stood on the edge of becoming the most dangerous force the galaxy had ever known. Is it too much to handle? Hawk jumped, his clawed hand knocking over a nearby data pad. He looked up to see the human instructor standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "I didn't mean to startle you," the instructor said, stepping into the room. "I see you're learning about our history." Hawk swallowed hard. I didn't realize how much conflict your people have endured." The instructor nodded, his gaze distant. "It's not something we're proud of, but it's who we are. Earth shaped us into warriors, and the galaxy hasn't given us much reason to stop." Hawk hesitated before asking, Do you think humans will ever stop fighting?" The instructor's eyes met Hawk's, a flicker of something ancient and unyielding in them. "We fight to survive, Hawk. As long as there's something out there that threatens us, we'll keep fighting. It's not just what we do, it's what we've become." Hawk nodded, understanding now what the instructor had been trying to teach them all along. Humans weren't just a product of their environment, they were a product of conflict shaped by war and hardship into something the galaxy wasn't ready for. As the instructor turned to leave, he paused at the doorway. "The galaxy is vast, Hawk, and full of species that think they understand war. But they don't understand us. Not yet." Hawk stood at the window of the Academy's observatory, staring out at the distant stars. For the first time since coming to the Academy, he felt a deep, gnawing fear. It wasn't just for his people, or for the other species that made up the galactic community. It was for the future of the entire galaxy. Humans weren't like anyone else. They had been forged in the crucible of war, honed by conflict until they had become the ultimate survivors. But survival came with a cost. And as Hawk thought back to the human soldier in the simulation room and the way he had dismantled those combat droids without hesitation, he realized that the galaxy was on the brink of something it couldn't stop. A human legacy was unfolding, and Hawk knew deep down that there was no force in the galaxy that could stop it. They had learned too late that humans weren't just another species, they were an unstoppable force. And when the galaxy came to understand that, it would already be too late. The stars gleamed coldly in the distance, unaware of the quiet storm brewing among the sentient races. Humans had survived their death world. Now the question remained, could the rest of the galaxy survive humans? As the lights of distant starships blinked in the darkness, Hawk whispered to himself, "We are not ready." And with that, the realization settled in. A galaxy that had once thrived on peace and diplomacy was about to face its greatest challenge yet. The relentless edge had been crossed, and nothing would ever be the same again.